I used to be a lot more of a progressive, liberally minded person. And as I learned more about politics and especially, more about my own morality and more about philosophy and policy and economics, the more I've kind of moved to the right. And I'm still pretty squarely liberal overall. I'm more or less a social democrat even. However, I've been always very socially anti-Marxist, anti-far left. I've always been anti-progressive. And there's very little that I have that's against conservatives except for certain economic policies. I'm not an ANCAP. I believe in regulation. I believe regulation is necessary to prevent certain uh, things like monopoly. But, I'm pretty just in the center. And as such, I watch a lot more conservative commentators. One of the guys I watch is Ben Shapiro. And Ben Shapiro fascinates me to no end because I agree with him most of the time. There's things I disagree with him on. Most of those have to do with religion because he's a Orthodox Jew and God isn't real. So naturally, I'm going to disagree with him as an atheist. However, he makes me think about one of the subjects I'm most fascinated by, which is morality. And one of the most contentious moral issues, that comes up in politics, especially in the ideas of right versus left, is abortion. And that's one that I waffle on consistently. I'm very on the fence. I am not anti-abortion. I'm pro-woman's right to choose. However, there are people who say that abortion's always fine. Okay, it's always a woman's right to choose. Well, I would kind of have a serious problem if you're in the third trimester and your fetus has a working nervous system and a heartbeat. At that point, I'm like, why don't you give that up for adoption? Okay? Maybe even second trimester. No, I'm not... And then, then there's the ideas of, is life sacred? Well, I don't think anything's sacred. I don't believe in the divine. And I am fully comfortable and not at all afraid, as many people are, to know that morality is not objective. All morality is consequential. All morality should be weighed on the pros and cons, the consequences versus the benefits. And mostly we think about moral questions after the fact. We don't like to acknowledge how hard they are when you're in the middle of it. And abortion is a pretty serious moral question, And one of the more interesting ways to think about it is potential. The argument from potential, I think, for abortion is, say the fetus can't, it's not viable outside the womb. It doesn't have a working system. It doesn't have a heartbeat. It's a bundle of cells. However, it's a potential life. That argument is not without value. That argument actually has weight. I like to think of it as the Clint Eastwood Unforgiven argument. If you kill a man, you don't just take away everything he is and everything he has. You take away everything he ever will have and everything he ever will be. That's not valueless. That's not meaningless. That's a real question. So as such, I don't think I would ever get an abortion were I a woman. And since I have a penis, you can take that argument or leave it. And I don't think I would ever pressure anybody I know or really be terribly supportive of anybody I know getting an abortion. And I would never ask a woman I knocked up to get an abortion. Now, I've never knocked up a woman. It's actually very easy to do. It's called 1, don't come in her, and 2, you should probably wear a condom or have her on birth control or some measure of all three. But you got to do something. And really, it's remarkably easy to not knock somebody up. You people should stop doing that. Now, the thing that a lot of people want to say is like, oh, well, if you really think a fetus is a life, well, what if, this is an argument that Ben Shapiro was faced with, where he said, what if you had a 1,000, what do you call it, 1,000 viable embryos in a room in a burning building, and in another room is a living 5-year-old child, or a living baby. Which one do you save? Well, the correct answer, honestly, is the baby. I think we'd all agree on that, and Ben Shapiro agreed on that. However, because Ben Shapiro didn't save 1,000 potential lives, that person would say, "Hi, you're not true to your principles." No, because there's a matter of consequence there. Because I think Ben Shapiro would agree with me that the child is, first of all, fully capable of suffering. That the child belongs to somebody. There's people who care about the child. The child has a life, and therefore does matter more than 1,000 potential lives, maybe even a million. And that's not necessarily logical, But Ben Shapiro argues that that's actually moral, whether or not it's logical. And I would agree. And probably the only thing that I am at all rigid on in terms of morality, because the same sort of questions you can throw at any moral question. This is why I'm very staunchly against any person who thinks morality is objective. It's absolutely not. Because then there's the famous trolley question. All right, a trolley is headed towards a track that has 5 people tied to it. And if the trolley runs that way, it'll kill those 5 people. But if you divert the track, or divert the trolley into the other track, this only other track that's your option has 1 person tied to it. Should you pull it? Well, I would only consider pulling it moral if you are fully aware of all the questions. I personally think the moral answer, and of course the answer that would be rooted in any sort of realistic scenario, is you would continue to try to stop the trolley at any costs, which of course would probably result in the trolley running the track it's on and killing 5 people instead of 1. However, I still think that's the only moral choice, is stop the fucking trolley, and if you fail, you fail. Okay, you should try to prevent any life. Okay, and trying and failing is more moral than making this kind of Machiavellian pragmatic decision. Now, if I knew for sure 1 versus the 5, it would be something that'd probably haunt me the rest of my life. But if I knew for sure that the trolley was absolutely unstoppable, I'd pull it, personally. I would. So that's the difference, between, this unrealistic scenario versus reality is, if it was in reality and I didn't have this absolute knowledge that the trolley couldn't be stopped, I'd just try to stop the fucking trolley. And fail, obviously. But the only hard and fast, rigid thing I have in morality is hypocrisy is the only sure evil. If you claim to have principles and don't follow them, that's evil every day of the week. And this is the number one thing I resent progressives in the authoritarian left, the far left, the alt-left, whatever you want to call them. I call them progressives because that's what they are. These people are hypocrites no matter what. Because these people will cry and cry and cry about loss of life and virtue signal this, that, and the other thing. But the second that they have deemed someone to be morally inferior, all of a sudden they're like, somebody should assassinate Donald Trump. Well, what about, killing people is wrong? I thought that's why you were, anti-war. And then there's, they're so against any kind of war fighting that they would side against the American military and against the American populace and with Islamic terrorists like ISIS, like surefire ISIS, or they'd side against us and with North Korea. Oh, fuck people. America's colonialist and white. They don't deserve to live. But because they're yellow or because they're brown, ISIS matters more. ISIS life is more sacred because they're not white. Shit like that. That's racist. That's hypocritical. That's a fucking rainbow of evil right there. So, if you can't admit that, if you're anti-racism and then all you do is talk about white people this, whiteness that, blackness this, you're actually a racist with no respect for your principles. If you think that you're pro-equality and then your idea of social justice is lowering standards for black people or affirmative action for women or, fuck everybody, or you're pro-poor people in America, but then you're pro-mass immigration from countries where people don't even speak English, they can't read and write, and they shit on the sidewalk in their countries, and they're going to come here and not know English and not be able to read and write and shit on your sidewalk. Well, how moral are you really? And then again, I always think there's an interesting question of rich people. I think Paul Joseph Watson does have the right of it when people multi-billionaires like J.K. Rowling say stuff like, pro-migrant this, pro-migrant that, and then, they own all this property and they have all these bedrooms in their multiple mansions and they aren't going to take any of these migrants in. Well, it's like, Are you really pro-migrant, or are you just pro letting them in and letting them be poor people's problems, but you don't have to deal with any of it? Well, are you really moral? And the answer is fucking no. Okay? Are you really charitable? The answer is fucking no. Or like, Italy let in a whole bunch of migrants, and, there's all this shit that George Clooney said about, oh, let all these migrants in and stuff, and well, migrants turned the area around his villa in Italy into a shithole, and he sold his villa and moved his family out of there because he didn't think the area was safe and the area was not as nice as it used to be, and it was that way because of the migrants that George Clooney was so in favor of. And he couldn't even stand to live in the same town as them. Forget let them on his property or live among them. Couldn't stand to be in the same town as the migrants he was so in favor of. It's called being a hypocrite. And in my opinion, hypocrisy is evil every day of the week. It's not as evil as shooting a person, okay? Everything is in matter of weight, in matter of degree. Everything's on a spectrum, really. But hypocrisy is never good. It never has been. It never will be. Okay? So if you're a hypocrite, you can know that in that moment where you're being a hypocrite, in that specific circumstance, you are not a good person. You're not a principled person. You're a liar and a fraud, and you don't mean what you say. And for all of you really religious people out there, Jesus was really not into a lot of religious laws. He said he was there to uphold every law of the scriptures, which every Christian lies and says he didn't say that, Matthew 5:17. However, Jesus didn't give a shit about washing his hands before eating sacred meals. Jesus didn't give a shit about, associating with unclean people, associating with prostitutes, women on their period. Never cared about anything sacred. But Jesus told multiple parables where he said, if you lie, if you are disloyal, not only are you least in heaven, but you're more than likely destined for hell. If you lie, if you're a hypocrite, if you're a fraud, if you're a cheat, and if you are disloyal, if you are faithless, you are going to hell. That is the one thing he was never known to waffle about, okay, as a character. I don't personally believe the character of Jesus Christ ever existed in reality, but whether you think that is true or not, if you hold Jesus as some kind of paragon of morality, the one thing he said for certain is do not be a hypocrite. That is the surest path to evil. And that's the morality you should have in your code no matter what your politics are. And I think, honestly, if you're a progressive and you decide to stop being a hypocrite, your politics will probably change. Jack. Thanks for watching.